right, let's go ahead and get started then. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We're very excited to be talking with you about an extremely important topic, which is information security and making sure that you can trust your partners when it comes to sharing sensitive patient data with those partners. Today we're going to be talking about HITRUST and why is HITRUST so important for providers to know about, especially when HIPAA and HIPAA self-secured is not enough. So we're joined today by Allegiance Group, Bruce Gehring, and of course I'm Joey Graham with Prochant. Just a little bit about myself, and then I'll have Bruce introduce himself. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for Prochant. We are a billing service and outsourcing company that works with pharmacy and home medical equipment providers. We've been in business for about 20 years now. And I actually grew up in the industry, started my first job and career in the home medical equipment space, worked my way up from the bottom. And so now very excited to be working with Prochant and helping to really just streamline and improve providers' revenue cycle, and of course increase their collections and help them meet their financial goals. Bruce, you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Certainly, thanks, Joey. My name is Bruce Gehring, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development here at the Allegiance Group. And Allegiance Group works hand in hand with Prochant in providing patient pay, billing and collection services. The two go together very, very well. And that's why it's extremely important when you're working with outsourced organizations to make sure that you're working with a credible partner. And Prochant and Allegiance Group has been working together now for, gosh, Joey, I want to say at least 10 years.
Yeah.
We've been in the same space in the HME, DME area in the industry, working with pharmacies and specialty practices and all of the healthcare channels for the last 15 years. So we're really excited to be here today to talk about this because this is becoming so incredibly important to all of us. Joey?
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. I want to make sure we respect everyone's time today and keep this webinar to 30 minutes. So our agenda today is, first we're going to talk about what is HITRUST, just to kind of get oriented on what is this thing we keep talking about, why does it matter, so why should you care about this, and a little bit about the certification process and what do companies go through. Let's say maybe you want to put your company through the certification, or you want to understand when you go with a vendor who's got this certification, what is it, that process that they had to go through to get it. And then finally, what's kind of the solution? What are some options for you as you look to move forward? So we're going to jump right in and talk about what is HITRUST. So HITRUST stands for the Health Information Trust Alliance. That's what that stands for. HITRUST is Health Information Trust Alliance. And what it is a common security framework. That's what that CSF stands for, Common Security Framework. What they've essentially done is there are all these sets of controls out there that people have to follow. Sets of controls meaning there are all these organizations from the federal government to the credit card companies to a number of other entities that are sort of mandating the way in which you need to manage data. Otherwise, you're not doing a good job and you're at risk. But there's a lot of them, and they have a lot of similar requirements, and also they have some different requirements as well. What HITRUST did is they went out to put together a common security framework, combining the requirements from all these different entities. And what I mean are there's HIPAA. HIPAA rules itself, which lives in federal law. ISO is related to the credit card processing data. Or no, that's PCI, I'm sorry. ISO is International Standards Organization. There's NIST, CCPA, CAQH, just an alphabet soup of agencies and requirements and things. They went ahead and consolidated all their requirements down to one framework. And so that's the Common Security Framework, and anybody can go and download it. So right now you can go online, you can go to the HITRUST Alliance website and download the CSF. It's about 600 pages. It's a real beefy document. Think about, your accreditation that you went through for your company with Joint Commission or one of the other accrediting agencies. This is like one of those, very beefy, a lot of requirements. And so that's the common security framework, and anybody can go out there and download it and do their best to implement it. But to have this logo that says HITRUST CSF certified, certified means that you've demonstrated compliance to the HITRUST Alliance. So not only did you go get all this information, but you went and implemented it, and then you went and proved that you implemented it to third parties. So that's a big deal, right? Because when somebody tells you that they're HIPAA secured, HIPAA certified, all that means is that they have done their best to implement a framework similar to this, but nobody has verified that. Nobody has checked to see, did they actually do that? Not only that, but all the downstream people who get that data. So it's not just the vendor that you work with. That vendor then has their own vendors, right, that they work with and that they share data with. And HITRUST makes sure that all those downstream entities are also trustworthy with your data. And that's a big, big deal. So Bruce, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. I want to hand it over to you for a second.
You bet. Yeah, Joey, I think you summed it up beautifully. And the fact that HITRUST requires you to demonstrate and prove that you are credible in how you manage data should just mitigate risk across the board. And that's really, really important. And let's just think about the environment today. I mean, you can't help but turn on the TV and hear about breaches of some sort, and ransomware, and all these different threats that are facing our organizations. So having HITRUST certification should mean a tremendous amount to your organization, to who your organization reports to, and give you a peace of mind that you're not going to be one of those victims out there that is going to be subject to some ransomware attack. Joe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's really the big thing looming on everyone's mind, I know, is ransomware. We'll talk some more about that. So now that we know sort of what is HITRUST, a little bit more about it, when you go through a HITRUST certification, you have to demonstrate compliance in 14 control categories. And I put those here on the screen for you, just so you can have an idea of the span of this assessment. It's really assessing the maturity level of your information security and your ability to prevent breaches of data. And if you look through this, it's looking at a lot of areas of your company. It's looking at the access control and how people are able to get into your systems. Do you have MFA, for instance, multi-factor authentication? How do you store your human resources and employee data? How do you manage compliance within your organization? Do you have a compliance committee? Does that committee meet regularly? Does it follow the right agenda and look at the right things to make sure that everything's in place that needs to be? Assets are a huge deal. We've all heard where a company loses a laptop, for example, and that laptop becomes a giant data breach because whoever gets it is able to access the data on that laptop. So are your laptops encrypted, and have you really tracked and managed those assets like you should? Physical and environment security is huge. That's, when somebody comes on site to your business where there is protected health information exposed, do you have the ability to stop people from coming in? Do people have to scan in with badges? Do you make sure that at the end of the day, all this stuff is off the desks and before the cleaning crew comes in? And there's just so many things you have to think about, even to the extent of when you print claims, like between where the claims are being printed and when they're being mailed, when you finally put them in a mailbox or give them to the USPS, you have now kind of given them over. But are they in a locked container between your office and the post office? I mean, this is real. So it's just an incredible amount of requirements and just an incredible amount of detail you got to go into your business to how you're managing your business and how you're managing your information systems. Do you have business continuity? I mean, that became super important with COVID, right? Because now all of a sudden they had shutdowns all over the world and people had to be able to continue to manage their business, right? So we had to go home. We had to be able to work from home. So just so much there. When you're implementing these control categories, there's also multiple maturity levels that you can achieve. So for you to get the HITRUST certification, it has to have a policy, a procedure, and it has to be proven that that is implemented. And of course, those have to meet the requirements of HITRUST. But then if you want to go even higher, you can have a measured and managed level where you are measuring and managing that data that's coming out of that implementation at a very high level. So there's just a lot. When you go in, like I said, it's a 600-page document is that common security framework. Just a lot of detail in there, certainly a lot to kind of dive into. Anything to add there, Bruce?
I think you covered it perfectly. I mean, it's just mind-boggling what we had to do and what you had to do to go through and set up the procedures, implement the procedures, have everybody understand those procedures. So there's all kinds of internal controls that are part of this too, that you have to be ready to embrace. And it's a lot of work.
That's right, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about why does this matter? So you're sitting here going, so what? Which is a valid question. Why does this matter? It's such a big thing, right? So I'm gonna read you some stats that I got from an article in Forbes. Just kind of blew my mind. So first off, 2020 broke all records in terms of data lost in breaches and cyber attacks. A lot of this ended up being the fallout of this near overnight shift to work from home that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. So just a lot of companies weren't quite ready. They sent people home and there was just a lot, and we've all heard about it, right? From the Colonial Pipeline situation on the East Coast to the Midwest, and I think it was like a Purdue plant or something. I mean, there's just so many different things that are making the news, but it happens so much. Identity theft doubled in 2020 from 2019 levels. It doubled in 2020. Malware increased by 358%, and ransomware increased by 435%. There's a new ransomware victim every 10 seconds in 2020. Every 10 seconds, a new ransomware victim. 1 in 5 Americans have been the victim of ransomware. 20%. You know, phishing attacks account for over 80% of the reported security incidents. And phishing attacks are those sophisticated email attacks where the email comes in, it looks like it's a legitimate email. You click the attachment or open the link, boom, you just let a virus into your system. 78% of employees lack confidence in their company's cybersecurity. Only 5% of companies have their folders properly protected. An F-35 jet is more likely to be brought down due to a cyber attack than by a missile. So I mean, like, wow, right? It's just insane. 80% of IT leaders believe that their organizations lack sufficient protection against cyber attacks. And here's one that really got me. 90% of healthcare organizations reported at least one security breach in the last 3 years. So this is so important. It's like beyond important, right? What's important is protecting our data. And as a provider, you know, it's one of the things that is why you don't sleep at night, right? It's one of the things that keeps you up at night is the data. And oh my gosh, what if we get breached? What if something like that happens? I've got to contact all my patients, all my doctors. I'm going to be on the news. Like, it's so much, right? It's a lot. And so how do I gain that confidence? And that's where HITRUST comes in. This is how you gain that confidence, by going through the process of getting certified. HITRUST is HIPAA's gold standard. It really is. It's the #1 thing. Like, you want to be a call center for United Healthcare or something like that, you have to have HITRUST certification. Right now, with the labor shortage and the Great Resignation that's happening across the country, this is, you know, people are turning to partners and outsourcing more than ever before. And so when you do that, you really have to think about, is my data going to be safe with that partner, right? Is trust me enough? So when somebody says we're HIPAA self-certified, they're saying, trust me, we read through HIPAA and we secured our systems. but nobody has independently verified that. There is no certification that you can get from HIPAA itself. So you have to go to one of these third-party frameworks like HITRUST, and there's a couple others. 75% of the Fortune 20 leverage this HITRUST. So that tells you the biggest companies out there all see a tremendous amount of value in this. And that's, I think it's this whole, obviously they're beholden to their stockholders and the public markets, but certainly you've got to have that level of confidence, right, Bruce?
No doubt. And when you're messing with not just people's data, but the potential threat of their livelihood, their money, their bank accounts. I mean, this is really a trust situation, and you've got to be absolutely rock solid in knowing that when you are providing that data, that it's going to be managed correctly, and there will be no opportunity for a breach of that trust. And that really sums up why our two organizations went through HITRUST. And by it's becoming, like Joey said, the gold standard of healthcare, as being able to work in this industry. And it's not going to be too much longer where, if you're not certified, you're probably not going to be able to do business. So, let's connect the dots. So get ahead of it.
Yeah, you didn't have to be accredited as a provider for years and years, right? But now it's table stakes. You got to be. So I think that this may someday become table stakes or some sort of HIPAA certification, right? We all need some kind of assurance that when a company says that your data is protected, that they're actually taking the steps that they say they're taking to protect that data. So let's talk a little bit about the certification process and what does that look like? So for somebody to go through a HITRUST certification, what does that look like? I can tell you for our company, the initial certification we thought was going to take about 6 months, and 6 months was a short, reasonable time frame. You can do it, but it's going to be tough. But you could do it in 6 months. Probably want to give yourself a year. We were told. We were like, no, we'll do it in like a quarter. No, that's not at all what happened, right? Once you got into it, you realize, oh man, we're in a little bit over our head. It took us a couple years actually to get through the full initial certification and make all the changes and investments that we needed to make in our systems and architecture to be able to even pass the assessment. So it took us a couple years. It took us a couple $100,000. I mean, this was not an inexpensive thing that we went through, not only in the fees for getting the assessment, but also the fees for improving our information systems architecture and putting the right technology in place to make sure that we were safe. So it was just a tremendous process, but certainly it's been worth it. So the first thing you've got to do when you want to do a certification is you have to hire an external assessor. That's actually the first step. And HITRUST would help you find the assessors that they approve of. And you're going to go out and find that person, and that person is going to help you get started because it's a lot. It's a lot of work to get this thing in place. Then you're going to go through something called scoping, and scoping is, you see, it's kind of like the first step of the certification itself. Once you've got the assessor, and it's all up, the whole rest of the certification relies on that scoping exercise. So you end up having to do a data flow diagram that shows the flow of data through your departments, through your organization. How's that data gathered? Where is it transmitted? How is it stored? How is it processed? How is it removed and destroyed? You have to do a full asset inventory, all the systems and servers and nodes and firewalls and all the stuff that's out there that's in your information architecture. A full network diagram that shows, how the public internet, your internal safe space, how are you protecting that? Your system management processes. So all those things come together in that scoping exercise. And now you're scoping out what exactly are we certifying here, in terms of the scope of the engagement, which we'll talk about in the solution. Next, you're going to go through and purchase the subscription. So, it's just like with these other accrediting bodies, you have to purchase sort of a license or a subscription. You keep renewing that every year. And that kind of lives out there and is how you interact with the HITRUST body. And then you're going to go through a pre-assessment and gap analysis. So your external assessor is going to help you with that. They're going to go through and help you figure out where are you missing things? What are some initial things that we know you're going to have to do before you even get into the nuts and bolts of it? So once you go through all that, now you're ready to get into your policies and procedures. Your policies and procedures end up being like the linchpin of this whole thing. It takes a tremendous amount of energy and effort to make sure that for all those 14 control areas I showed you before, you have robust policies and procedures to talk about all the different aspects of those different areas. This is a tremendous amount because not only, it's just like with accreditation where they hold you to your policy and procedure, but your policy and procedure has to meet certain requirements as well, right? So that part of how do I make sure that when I say that I've got the right protections in place in my network infrastructure, how do I make sure that that meets the requirements of HITRUST? That's where your external assessor comes in, maybe even some additional consultants. This part, for us, when I talked, it took us a couple years. About a year of that was the policies and procedures. It was just a tremendous amount of work to make sure that they were at the level they needed to be at. Then you have to go do the technical readiness, which is where you apply the policies and procedures to your actual network and information structure. And are we following our own policies and procedures is basically the question you're answering there. And a lot of times you're not. And you have to come up with a corrective action plan, a CAP. That's really important because your external assessor will work with you. Is this going to even be acceptable? Some corrective actions, the HITRUST will say, all right, just make sure it's there for the next assessment. Make sure you have a plan to get this addressed. But some of them, it's a no-go. It's a non-starter. You don't have that. You're not going to be able to get the certification, bottom line. So then you got to go back and put that stuff in place. You got to make investments in some high-end technology to make sure everything's safe. Finally, you're ready to go and do an external assessment. So your assessor is now going to plug in. He's going to look through policies and procedures and your proof of implementation. Does everything there? Does that technical assessment work out? Is my corrective action plan going to be within guidelines? Okay, now you're ready to submit evidence and inherit. Now you're submitting that to HITRUST. So the assessor is actually doing that for you. You're going to send them all your proof. They're going to look it over. They're going to submit it to HITRUST. Everything's going to sit there for 90 days. And HITRUST is going to poke holes in everything. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to set up calls with your leaders. They're going to try and see, is this true? They said all this stuff was in place. Can they prove it? And they got 90 days to poke holes in everything that you've said. Finally, if you make it through, you're going to get your certification. So that, wow, right? Like what a process. It really was an intense process. How about you, Bruce? I'm sure this was quite a process for you guys as well.
And I'll take it one step further too, Joey, because just what you described of being able to get the policies and procedures in place, implemented, and going through the addressing of any of the shortfalls. I mean, they used it's a green, yellow, red, coding on each one of those, numerous, tests that they do on the system. And, you have to address all those. But once you've got your certification, that gives you that, that level of confidence that everything's being done correctly. But it's not the end all be all. You have to continue, because there's going to be things that have to, like Joey mentioned, must be in place by the next assessment, or there are things that need to be worked on that you are working on, and you have to show proof that those things are progressing appropriately. And so it's a continuous process, and you have to go through that certification process like every 2 years so that you can go ahead and maintain that HITRUST certification. So it is not, like put your policy procedures in a book, put it on the shelf and say you're done. You have to, it's constantly being looked at. And things change in technology. We know how fast technology changes. So we have to be able to go ahead and prove that we are staying up with those technology, those latest threats, all of that. And that's where that third-party assessor can really help identify any of those areas as you're living out your certification.
Yep, absolutely. And so to kind of wrap things up and, talk about, so what are some next steps? I think the biggest next step that we would all recommend here is when you are looking at partners out there in the market, you want to look at partners who have proven that they're going to protect your information, bottom line, right? And so when you go through this assessment, you go through that scoping, and you scoped out what is being certified here. For Prochant, we got certified our RCM services. So all of our systems that touch our client systems that contain that sensitive patient data, those were all within scope for us. And so when you're working with Prochant, you can have confidence that that sensitive information is contained within a HITRUST-certified information systems architecture. And similarly with the Allegiance Group, right, Bruce? You guys have your amazing product, Collect Plus, and that product, Collect Plus, has been HITRUST-certified.
Absolutely. And to your point, Joey, because we have partners within our Collect Plus framework that assist us with collections and all that, you want to make sure that that process is secure from start to finish. And so that's one of the things, on the patient pay workflow, from the time that invoice is generated to when an account's in collections and it's being worked on by an agency, all of that information is secure within the Collect Plus program.
Yep, absolutely. So that's, I think that's our point, right? And I think if you have, more questions, we'd love to help you with any questions you have. Certainly, we highly recommend you take some time to go out to the HITRUST Alliance website, and they have some amazing information out there. Many providers are looking at getting HITRUST certified themselves because, again, we're talking about that ability to sleep at night, that ability to think, my systems are as safe as they can possibly be, and that my team is actively managing that on a daily basis. And I don't have to, I should always be worried about cybersecurity, but I don't need to be overly concerned because I know that I've done up to everything that I could do to make sure that it's as safe as it possibly can be. So any questions, concerns, comments, we welcome. Please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Bruce. And we really appreciate you guys taking the time to sit here and listen to us today. Any last words there, Bruce?
No, again, please contact us if you have any questions. Obviously, this is going to be a recording, so you can go back and revisit it because there's so much information that has been provided to you today. If you haven't, had a chance to really look into certification, this is a great place to start. And either one of us can help you with, where to go, who to contact to help you get started.
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.